We are going to look at square roots today. So first of all, what is a square root? Square root of a number. We're going to start out with a b squared equals a. Then b is a square root of a. So let's look at an example and see what that means in terms of numbers. So because 3 squared is 9, that means that 3 is the square root of 9. So 3 squared is 9. Square root of 9 is 3. All positive numbers have two square roots, a positive and a negative. So 3 squared is 9. But there's another number squared. Negative 3 squared is also equal to 9. So the square root of 9 is 3 and negative 3. So let's write the following out in words. What does it mean? So the first one, if I would read it, square root of 9 equals 3. So square root of 9 equals 3. The next one, it's similar except negative. So negative square root of 9 is equal to negative 3. Now, the last one. We have a positive and a negative sign. So the positive and negative signs means positive and negative square root of 9 equals or is equal to 3 or negative 3. So positive or negative square root of 9 equals a positive 3 and or a negative 3. Now, negative numbers do not have square roots. So I cannot take the square root of negative 9 because no number squared can equal a positive number. On the previous slide, we had the example of negative square root of 9. So here, according to order of operations, I would first evaluate square root of 9, which is 3 and negative 3, and then slap a negative on it. So this is not a negative square root here. This one is, because no number squared can be positive, so I cannot take the square root of a negative number if it's under the radical sign. Let's evaluate some expressions. Square root of 81 is 9 or negative 9. That's according to what we've done. We're not going to be so concerned about the negative one. We're just going to say square root of 81 is 9. Now negative square root of 81, so the square root of 81 is still 9, but we put a negative in front of it. So it's equal to negative 9. So I do the positive square root of 81, then put a negative out in front of it. Same thing in the next one. I take the square root of 81, which is 9, and then put the plus or minus sign in front of it. This one, there is no real solution. I cannot take the square root of a negative number because it's inside this square root symbol. By the way, there's an imaginary 2 there. It's not written, but with a square root, there's an imaginary 2. With the next one, the negative square root of 36, so it's going to be negative. And I have the square root of 36. 6 squared is 36. So the square root of negative 36, or the negative square root of 36 equals negative 6. Now the square root of 8, we have to use our calculators for. So we type in square root of 8 and get 2.83 if we round. 2.83. So we saw some there that were nice numbers, and then the last one had a decimal on it. So the square of an integer is a perfect square. So sometimes there's really nice numbers. And here's a list of some of them. The square root of 4 is 2, square root of 9 is 3, square root of 16 is 4. And that's because you can take 1 squared equals 1, 2 squared equals 4, 3 squared equals 9, 4 squared equals 16, 5 squared is 25. So those are nice numbers because when you take the square root, you get an integer. Now if it's not one of those numbers listed there, and you can see how the pattern would continue, you got 7 squared is 49, so 8 squared is 64, that would be the next one on the list. Then the square root is irrational. So the square root of 8, which we did on the last slide, is an example of one that's irrational. We have to round it. It's going to keep going on. It's not going to end. And the last thing here, I've kind of mentioned it a couple times already, that radical sign, right? The symbol that we use for the square root, we often call a radical. So let's do some evaluating again. We have the square root of b squared minus 4ac. We want to know it when a, b, and c are those values. So we're going to plug those in. So b squared, so negative 3 squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 2, times c, which is positive 2. Order of operation, we do powers first. So it's invisible parentheses. Everything under the radical needs to be done first, then we can take the radical. Negative 3 squared, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, minus 4 times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, and that's going to be a negative 16. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, times 2 is negative 16. Minus a negative is like plus, so 9 plus 16 is 25. Square root of 25 is 5. With this one, we have the square root of 2, and 2 is not a perfect square, so when we do that on our calculator, square root of 2 is 1.414. So next we're going to multiply that by 5, because invisible parentheses are on the numerator and denominator, and we have multiplication first. So 4 plus or minus 5 times 1.414 is 7.07. Right? Now it's plus or minus, so I need to add and subtract. So I'm going to do 4 plus 7.07, which is 11.07, and then divide that number by 8. So my answers are 1.38, or now I have to subtract 4 minus 7.07, and then divide that number by 8. I get negative 0.38.